was always a slim chance that we were going to be wrong about this movie. A slim chance that it might actually be good. There's stories of dress rehearsals going absolutely terrible, and then producing a play that is totally brilliant. So I was prepared to accept that maybe the early critics had some truth to their reviews, and that I would be giving Snow White a positive one myself. I am happy to say, after walking out of the theater last night, that once again, the critics were wrong, and the general sensibilities and opinions of the mainstream audience were once again right. I had been gleefully anticipating this movie for the last year and a half, and if it had been good, I would have been bewildered, but fair. I am glad to report that I will not have to. There is something very unapologetic in how truly terrible that Snow White is. Despite having a ton of evidence for just how bad this movie would be, going back nearly 2 years to interviews with Gal Gadot and Rachel Zegler on the red carpet, to these early images of the magical forest creatures, later becoming bandits, to the frighteningly pinata-like dwarves brought to life in recent trailers, to the revelation of new music that didn't feel a thing like the original, it's very interesting how all of that was put together on screen to make up the mess that this movie was. I will say first and foremost that Rachel Zegler has a great singing voice, to the point where I think she could have a genuinely good career on Broadway when her Hollywood stint comes to an end. It'll probably be better for her career if she were to do so, and where there won't be quite as much spotlight. And unfortunately for her, this movie will be in the spotlight for probably a long time. Her voice is probably the only thing about this movie that isn't bad. The first 20 minutes of the film were just generic voiceovers and expositions about the history and beginnings of the Snow White story. The kingdom itself seems to have a lot of social welfare when it comes to the king and queen spending time amongst their people and distributing apple pies. I'm not kidding. That is a legitimate plot point throughout the film, where Snow White herself is rooted in equity and social distribution. But given everything else that's in this movie, it's probably the thing that is the least problematic. After the death of Snow White's mother, Gal Gadot's evil queen arrives and marries the king before sending him off on a long crusade to his inevitable death, after which she proceeds to take over the kingdom and hoard a whole bunch of food in the castle and refusing to share with the people. Snow White is put to work cleaning the palace and keeping out of sight to the point where no one has seen her in years. All of that changes when a young bandit by the name of Jonathan breaks into the palace and tries to steal food from the queen's table. He is caught, and Snow White tries to advocate for him to her stepmother, who refuses and has him tied to the palace gates so he can die of exposure. Jonathan is then freed by Snow White and is given a hunk of bread before he is sent on his merry way. Of course, this sends the queen into a jealous rage, and she sends the huntsman after Snow White while she is picking apples to kill her and bring back her heart. Just like in the classic story, the huntsman has a change of heart at the last minute and sends Snow White into the woods, where she meets the dwarves, followed by the bandits led by Jonathan, and they all band together to stop the evil queen and take back the kingdom. This movie has so many parts of it that are genuinely terrible, but for the sake of my sanity and your patience, I'm going to focus on the 3 that are by far the worst. The first would be Gal Gadot's evil queen. Gal Gadot was an interesting aspect because she was kind of forgotten about in the face of all the controversy surrounding Rachel Zegler. She was in all the interviews and did contribute, but only as a sort of background figure, and managed to keep a lot of the dirt off of herself. But this movie genuinely brought to light just how miscast she was as the evil queen. Gal Gadot's role as Wonder Woman I never really questioned because I actually liked that part for her. However, maybe that had to do with the fact that Wonder Woman was more action than dialogue, and Gal never really got the chance to show off her range and tell us what sort of an actress she was. When I see her in other roles, I was taken out of the film by her acting and found it kind of painful to watch. As the evil queen, she was trying way too hard. Her character was cartoonish at best and downright off-putting at worst. There were 2 instances with her character that were genuinely disturbing. The first being where she has her own original song to sing, All Is Fair. I feared for her health at the start of the song because she looked like she was being puppeteered for how jerky and spastic her movements were. No amount of sound editing helped her voice sound like it belonged in a film like this, particularly next to Rachel Zegler's, by contrast, who is a very good singer. It was hard not to laugh all throughout the musical number because it took me out of the movie entirely and made me think I was watching some sort of parody. Like this was SNL and Gal Gadot had been commissioned to do a musical number and do it as over-the-top and ham-fisted as she possibly could. I was very relieved when it was over and hoped that there wouldn't be some sort of reprisal of the song before the end of the movie because I don't think my sanity could have taken it. The second was when the evil queen transformed into the old hag. The CGI that was used was some of the most horrifying that I have ever seen on screen, and once more took me out of the film because I was so disturbed about seeing it. I never want to see anything like that ever again. It was the stuff of nightmares and really brings to life just how much effort or thought was put into making this movie organic. This movie costs, from all reports, $300 million to make, and looking at the finished result, you would never be able to tell. And speaking of CGI, we have to talk about the dwarves, which were by far the most disappointing part of the movie for me. The actual design of the dwarves is very reminiscent of papier-mâché piñatas. The CGI that goes into making them is horrifically awful, and like the CGI with the old hag, is completely terrifying. Nothing about these dwarves feels organic like in the original film. They are not charming or whimsical or endearing in any way, and are just soulless, lifeless husks of computer-generated images with over-the-top speaking voices and personalities. The only word that can sum up the entirety of the dwarves is obnoxious. Snow White is not a hunted princess seeking shelter with some kind companions. Instead, she's like a school matron teaching rowdy children how to behave, and it's grating to watch because all the magic about them has been removed. Additionally, the dwarves are pretty much useless in this film. They don't really do anything, save for Doc, who has a single moment in the movie of usefulness that is immediately undercut by him saying that he didn't know what he was doing, and it was all just sheer luck that everything worked out in the end. In the original movie, the dwarves had a pretty important part to play in the film, from housing Snow White and protecting her from the evil queen, to going on a rampage and chasing her down when she had killed Snow White to avenge their friend. They were brave and honest people, even grumpy, who didn't like Snow White at first. As you can imagine, Disney men killing Disney women is not a thing that happens anymore like in the original stories, and so the dwarves do not even have their moment of bravery where they get to kill the evil queen for the crimes against their friend. Instead, they act like passive-aggressive puppets who don't contribute to the plot in any meaningful way. In this movie, the dwarves have been robbed of any of their charm and personality, and Dopey is an abused child who didn't speak for 200 plus years because the other dwarves were mean to him, and Snow White helps him find his voice. This is a plot point that didn't even enter my imagination as part of the story, but Dopey's whole personality is attributed to the fact that he was bullied by the other dwarves, and that's why he doesn't talk. It's just one more way in which the charm from the original story has been removed in favor of a modern-day sensibility that is inorganic and insincere. Something else I didn't consider to be a problem with this movie that actually turned into one of the most unlikable things about it were the songs. Aside from the song Waiting on a Wish, which I actually liked, every other song in Snow White is terrible. A lot of that has to do with the fact that no one but Rachel Zegler can sing, but the writing for the songs is unbelievably atrocious. From All Is Fair to Princess Problems, I couldn't believe what I was hearing when the songs began. With the exception of Hi Ho and Whistle While You Work, every song in this movie is original and entirely awful because of it. The spastic emoting, over-enunciation, and lack of heart in every one of the songs certainly didn't help them become memorable, and in fact could be a reason that this movie is forgotten about by a lot of people. This movie did not feel like a fairy tale. Even though there was some bizarre form of magic and little people living in a forest in a cottage, there was nothing about Snow White that felt whimsical or charming or sincere. Though Rachel Zegler has a great singing voice, her portrayal of Snow White felt very wooden to me. It felt like she was playing at being a character and lacked any of the genuine emotion needed to bring the character of Snow White to life. The fact that this movie doesn't have a prince and instead calls him a bandit doesn't really help much either. Nothing about Snow White felt impactful, and even the death of the evil queen is a cause for hysterical laughter, not relief that she's gone. The death of the evil queen was probably the most bewildering part of the movie, because her death is brought about from smashing the mirror after Snow White wakes the soldiers up from whatever brainwashing they had been under, which caused them to forget their names, apparently. I genuinely couldn't believe what I was seeing when she stopped the soldiers from killing her by calling them Paul and William and John and reminding them of their professions of farmer and baker and calling on their memories of when all the people went out to their farms to pick fruit. It was genuinely mind-blowing how Rachel Zegler's Snow White went about defeating the evil queen to the point where it was just laughable. This movie will likely never get a sequel, thank God. But the fact that the evil queen's supposed death is open to interpretation is also something that I don't really understand plot-wise. And if there is one thing that does not need to happen, it's trying to comprehend this movie. In summation, Snow White was awful, from the acting, to the singing, to the songs themselves, to the villain, to the papier-mâché dwarves, to the climax, and right on through to the end. The Disney live-action brand, though thoroughly tarnished, has just had another stick of dynamite dropped on it from the release of this movie, and whether or not the pieces of creativity will ever be found is anyone's guess. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Have you seen Snow White yet? And if you have, what did you think of it? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section, and let the conversations begin. Until next time, everyone.